Good morning, Commissioner Peach.
Hi, this is Bill Peach.
Yep, hear you fine.
Thank you much.
Hi, this is Jim Cahill. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Great, thank you.
And Commissioner Franz should be available now. So can we check your audio, Commissioner Franz? Haven't heard.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Great.
Okay, I have a little after 9 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and mute and pull the registration report.
Okay. Ralph, I see 4 board members, including myself. Commissioner Peach is online. Do we have Superintendent Rachel?
So I don't see Superintendent Rayfield in the attendee list either.
Okay, so, all right, well, is Tammy on? To see if we've heard anything from...
I am on. I'm sending an email right now to see if he's joining.
Great, thanks. It's so weird when you can't tell who's actually with you. There's
Yeah, we
something
can do
really
the list.
discomforting about it.
Bill's on the phone, so we do have a quorum and you can start the meeting.
Yeah, no, I heard that. I just wanted to make sure before we started with introductions. So first, we will now start the December 1st. Hard to believe we're almost through this painful year. Board of Natural Resources meeting minutes. We're going to first start with welcome and introductions. I actually hear a lot of feedback before we begin. If everybody can mute. Thanks. So I'm Hillary Franz, Commissioner of Public Lands. I will now turn over to Dr. Brown.
Hi, I'm Dan Brown. I'm the Director, School of Environmental and Forest Sciences, University of Washington.
Jim Cahill.
Good morning, Jim Cahill with the Office of Financial Management.
Dean Wright.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Andre Wright. I am Dean of the College of Agricultural Unit and Natural Resources.
And Commissioner Peach.
Good morning. This is Bill Peach, Clallam County Commissioner.
Next item is the webinar format briefing. Tammy, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the December 1st Board of Natural Resources meeting via webinar. My name is Tammy Kellogg, and I am your board coordinator. I'm going to take a few minutes this morning to go over how this webinar is planned to run today. Many of you are likely familiar with the structure of the Board of Natural Resources meetings. This webinar is structured to largely match our traditional board meetings. That said, there are some key differences. There are a couple of different ways people are attending today. Some of you have called into this meeting and are listening on your phones. That is the listen-only option for the meeting. Many of you have logged into the webinar through your computer or mobile device and are able to see and hear the presentation and conversations. If you did log in through the webinar, you also had the opportunity to sign up to make public comment during the comment periods for today's meeting, or you can just listen. If you check the box that you want to provide comment, your name was registered on a list and you will be called upon during the comment period. Currently, a list is being compiled of the names of individuals who would like to provide comments today. Once the list is completed, it will be forwarded to Commissioner Franz and she will call on you when it is your turn to speak. As always, we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. There are several of us working behind the scenes today, such as Ralph Johnson. Ralph is in charge of many things, not the least of which is unmuting you when it is time to speak. Please be aware that if you are an attendee, your microphones will be muted during the meeting. If you are signed up to speak, our organizer will unmute you so that you can provide comment. In contrast, board members have control of their microphones throughout the meeting. If you are on the telephone listening or having technical difficulties, if you are registered wrong or are having trouble figuring out how to register to speak at any of the public comment periods, we do have an email set up where you can request assistance. You are able to email Kenny at kenny.ocker@dnr.wa.gov. That's kenny@dnr.wa.gov. Kenny's email address is also at the bottom of the slide and is also listed at the bottom of the introductions for attending the meeting that are posted online. I will now hand this back to you, Commissioner Franz, for the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Tammy. I got to still get used to the mute and unmute here. First up is approval of the November 3rd, 2020 Board of Natural Resources meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, there's been a lot of moving parts there. I think a lot of people moved and a lot of people seconded. With that, all those in favor of approval of the November 3rd, 2020 Board of Natural Resources meeting minutes, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Hey, with that, I see Superintendent Rakedale, you've joined us. Want to just have you quickly do an introduction while we do lightning talk afterwards.
Couldn't hear you, Chris. Anyway, go.
Do you have me now? Okay. Good morning, Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Rakedahl. Sorry for being a little late here. I'll go back to mute.
That's okay. Hey, maybe this is the first time I can ever give like a tardy split to somebody in education who's in charge. Just kidding. Okay, we have lightning talk up, and I don't know, this is a new one. My team likes to throw me a curveball. I think the point of lightning talk is to help grab all the people who are doing public comments and fill your space with something engaging, but it didn't put anybody in charge of it. Angus, this is yours.
Actually, this is Caleb Mackey.
Right. Hello, Caleb. Next time they need to recognize you. Otherwise, I'm going to give the lightning bolt to someone else. But Caleb, this is your lightning moment. This is kind of like America's Got Talent. Show us what you got.
Well, good morning, Commissioner and board members. My name is Caleb Mackey, and I'm the Photogrammetry Supervisor here at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. Today, I'm going to do a quick lightning talk over how the Photogrammetry Unit supports DNR using stereo imagery. So quick overview of our little group. There's myself, Tony Alds, and John Klinke, who are senior photogrammetrists, and we have a newly minted photogrammetric tech, Ben Johnson. Our little group here is responsible for digitization and preservation of the historic aerial film archive, responding from requests both within and external from DNR for historical aerial imagery, and creating digital surface model data to support DNR forest inventory, wildfire, and other programs. So, quick overview of what photogrammetry is. It means to measure with light, and to do that measuring, we need stereo imagery. And stereo imagery is basically overlapping images, can be taken from a plane, a UAV, or even a hot air balloon. And what do we do with the stereo? We create stereo models. Basically, the overlap in those two photos is what we refer to as a stereo model. We can actually look at it in stereo, just like the fancy 3D movies. The picture on the right there is my boy demonstrating it. And we actually have a floating cursor in that model, which allows us to capture XY coordinates, much like traditional mapping software, but also a Z coordinate, or the elevation. So say we could tell you how tall the tree is. So where do we get our stereo? The first source that we use mainly here at DNR is our historical aerial film archive. We have over 2 million aerial film negatives. Picks up in the late 50s, and the last flight was in 2008. Since then, it's been digital cameras. We have about 2 scales we fly. We fly one that covers an entire section, or a square mile in one photo, and the other that covers an entire township. The other source for stereo is modern orthophoto projects. Most users who request these projects are not interested in the stereo. So DNR Photogrammetry Unit works with the vendors and partners to try to see about acquiring the stereo for use in our systems. So some of the products we make with this, most people are familiar with digital orthophotos. These are the same as what you see on Google Earth or Bing Maps. One of the kind of cool things of DNR Photogrammetry Unit is we can create modern digital orthophotos using historic aerial film. In this case, the image on the left is in the Capitol Forest area from 1958. The other new technology that we're really diving into here is digital surface modeling. Basically, the software goes through the stereo model and gets an elevational value for every pixel. So you end up with a grid of elevational values, which can be brought into software and rendered like you see down below, so you can see the buildings stand up or the trees. And this picture here is a map that was created for the entire state of Washington in 2015. Ignore the arrow up in the corner. That shows vegetation height. Basically, where the red is where our tall trees are. And we have this now being built up for multiple years for quick change detection. Forest inventory here in DNR uses this quite a bit. Kind of an example on the bottom. You know, like I told when I'm just a dumb data guy, but they could probably speak more as to what they use my data for. But I know it's one of the components to the FRIS system, the Forest Inventory System. And you can see on the right down there is one of the products that they create using the data that comes out of Photogrammetry Unit. Another example, another use for our photos is a before and after. In this case, we have a landslide. We were able to go back to 1972 where it was fairly undisturbed. And then, of course, there's the photo on 2019 to show the event. But like I said, we can do the digital surface modeling. So not only can we tell you a landslide happened, we can tell you the volume of material and hopefully where it ended up. And that's kind of an example of this. You'll see the DSM overlaid on top of the ortho on the right-hand side. And another use that has been keeping me busy is DNR Wildfire wants as much of this data as I can produce so that they can tell before and after fire severity. This is kind of a cool example of that, where they can kind of figure out the structure of the forest, or, well, I guess what's left after a fire. So I hope I didn't ramble too long. Once again, my name is Caleb Mackey. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask, or you can also email me if you think of any down the road. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caleb. Nice job. We don't usually talk about light positively at DNR to cause a little bit of havoc on our forest during fire season, but you did a good job of making us like light a little more. All right, first up, general items of interest, we have the great Jim Stauffer followed by Reed Blanchard.
Good morning, Commissioner and Board. Can you hear me? All right. I'm assuming you can hear me. Is that okay? I see the thumbs up. I'm also on a meeting to my left, the House Capital Budget Committee. So, you know, the positive things about the virtual meetings is that you can kind of do double duty, but not always pay close attention to one or the other, which now I'm paying attention to this meeting. Good to see you, Chris Reichtel, and I won't give you a tardy slip also for being late, though your school board director was here on time. So I'm, again, Jim Stauffer from the Sequim School District, and I'm also sit on WASDA's Trust Lands Advisory Committee and the Legislative Committee, and then I'm on DNR's Forest Health Advisory Committee. All good things for community discussions throughout the state, and it's a privilege serving on all those committees. I'm looking forward to the Trust Land Performance Assessment, which I see is under the chair report actually, and so I missed that step in my registration for the webinar. But I believe that meeting's on the 9th, and I think that will be very positive for community discussions amongst the 87 school districts that do receive some semblance of state forest revenue. And please support us in not overturning the WAC that enables us to keep those revenue, especially in these trying times. And I think this discussions are very important in our communities with our other elected officials, with county, all those other junior taxing districts, because it's a pretty complex issue of how those funds actually are used between the junior taxing districts. So this assessment will hopefully provide a clearer understanding. Thank you for your work, and it's a privilege being here. And it's somewhat sunny here in Sequim today, looking out my window. Thank you again.
Reed Blanchard, followed by Ed Bowen.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Reed Blanchard, and I live in Indianola, Washington, out in Kitsap County. And it seems always a little early in the morning to talk about such a serious topic like clear cutting. But, you know, after participating in these meetings for the last year or so, it seems people bring a couple of different reasons that they're opposed to clear cutting. You know, some see mature trees as more valuable left intact, especially when their ability to sequester carbon is starting to peak. You know, other people seem offended by the visual blight of a clear-cut forest. Some people object to what seems to be to be an illustration of excess. Yes, we need trees for timber, but do we need to take every tree in an area? It seems we clear cut forests more with backhoes and bulldozers than with chainsaws. Others call clear cutting anti-life. In the process of clearing every single tree, all the creatures, birds and owls, little slimy things that live in damp places, have to go elsewhere. And with increasing roads and development and people, there's really nowhere else to go. But there's also, like the speaker before me, there's people who are in favor of cutting. Local government, right? They need money for fire stations. Schools need money for programs. And the industry needs timber for steady jobs. But it doesn't seem that those folks are actually for clear cutting. The real problem to solve, in my opinion, is how to adequately fund schools and local governments. I think we need to stop the false choice between clear cutting and forest and funding these programs. It's an old system that needs to be revised. So I call on DNR to increase public participation in this process, to develop some new ideas, and to also start funding pilot and experimental projects that will look at alternative ways to harvest forest as opposed to clear cutting. Thank you very much.
Next up, Ed Bowen.
Yes, Ed Bowen up in the northwest corner of Clallam County. So I'm actually going to speak to your other topics in general. I do want to start off by saying I appreciate the comment I heard at the very beginning of the meeting about switching to the Zoom platform. This has been very complicated with your go-to meeting system. I have to use a telephone and a computer, tying up my telephone for the entire meeting just to be able to speak. So this is positive for me. But moving on, in your auction sales today from, I believe it was November, once again, the OASF in Clallam County receives 2 no-bid auctions, and this directly impacts my junior taxing district where I live on at least one of them directly. And this brings back to the question, now twice in a row we have no bids in the OASF, and how's the arrearage going to be handled if this is the platform, if this is the method, if this is the logic being used to address arrearage in Clallam County, and especially the OASF. And secondly, I've been waiting for your chair report assessment, performance assessment. 2 comments on that. Where's all the information going to be made available to the public that's in the presentation? This assessment is just a presentation in general and really doesn't provide us any of the details. And secondly, as I look at the end of the presentation, there's comments about engagement, outreach, and all that such. I hope we're not heading down the same road that we did with the solutions table, because I felt I did my due diligence to participate in that and to provide comments and solutions that really never got addressed. And so I'm just wondering who your basis is going to be in that aspect of the performance report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And you will see the report on the trust land performance at the end of December when we submit it to the legislature. We obviously with the board meeting couldn't time them perfectly, but we did not want to have the report go out to the legislature and then have to wait a whole month for this board meeting. So in a way, we're giving a bit of a sneak peek, but we also believe that before that report goes out, we should do full community engagement with all of our stakeholder partners, and those meetings are proceeding. And you will definitely have the full report very shortly, along with the legislature and the board members. So thank you for that. Next up on our schedule is public comments for timber sale action items. And we have Matt Kamiski, followed by Miguel, Perez, Gibson.
So Matt, I'll show you as being self-muted.
Oh, that's never been happened. Come on, Matt.
That was weird. I somehow like muted myself after I got unmuted. So I will tell you to second Ed's point, having now used just about every video conference platform available, it does change my default settings on every one of them. I notice as I switch between Zoom, GoToMeeting, and all the others out there, Skype and Teams and all that fun stuff. So anyway, good morning, board. Commissioner, for the record, my name is Matt Kamiski, Washington Manager for American Forest Resource Council. Today I just wanted to come and highlight you know, the importance of the timber sale program. I think as we've seen, and I think you'll see in your presentation today, there's a continued interest. The marketplace is working through some of the impacts from COVID-19 that, you know, saw some fluctuation in lumber prices, those type of things, but a lot of that seems to be working its way out of the system. Log prices still are fairly elevated for the most part because there's still a lot of demand out there. I think a good example of that is the auction in middle May yesterday. Just for an example, that went for almost $900,000 over minimum bid. State schools will get $983,000 and change. The Sultan School District a little over $690,000. So important revenue for education. And you know, you got to realize there's also all the jobs that support the kids going to those schools. That's important. And then finally, I just want to really thank Dwayne, Kashari, Patrick, Tom, and the rest of their team for their ongoing process improvement. It's been really helpful to kind of work through some of the various glitches and stuff that always come up in the processes of carrying out the business transactions of these timber sales. So that's been really helpful over the last several months of working through those, and we look forward to continue to work on that. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, Miguel Perez Gibson. Ralph, do we see Miguel?
He seems to have dropped off. He was there because he comes in as all caps.
Okay. Let's do this. If board members don't mind, I think we'll move forward with the presentation on the timber sales. Ralph, if you could signal to me when he appears, and I'll make sure there's no action taken until we've had a chance for Miguel to speak. But if you can let me know, Ralph, I'd appreciate that. Thanks.
Yes.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kashari to present timber sales for January.
Good morning. Nice to see everyone. Make sure that I can do this. So this is the presentation, the regular business presentation for the timber sales program. Today I have the regular business items to share with you, the results from our November sales, and asking for your approval of the package of sales we have prepared for you. In November, we offered 12 sales totaling 62.7 million board feet. Those minimum bids totaled $20.3 million and an average stumpage of $324 per thousand board feet. And as was already brought up, we sold 9 of those sales for 47.7 million board feet that will be added to our fiscal year 21 total delivered volume. Those sales totaled $19 million. The average was $398 per thousand board feet. And our average number of bidders dropped this month to 1.67. There were 2 of those 3 sales that were in Olympic region that did not sell. We will go through our agency's record of decision process to reevaluate those appraisals and offer those again. We did get feedback about logging and road costs going up in that area and log prices being high. Just moving forward, we have heard feedback just in the last couple of weeks that the salvage logging that'll be happening in Oregon following the significant fires down there is drawing a lot of loggers and logging trucks down to Oregon. So with the increase in supply on the market and the decrease of supply of harvesting equipment, we'll be keeping a close eye on that to be able to make sure that our appraisals are as close to actual market as possible. Those sales that we were offering in November, we had appraised at the end of September, which was right when the prices were going up. Any questions about the sales that we sold in November before I move on to the package I'm requesting your approval on?
Board members, any questions?
I saw a head shake there.
Go ahead, Commissioner Peach. I don't know how Kashari saw your head shake, but I'm joking. Go ahead.
I didn't see that.
Thank you much. Do you have a sense for when the Clallam sales will be offered? Excuse me, reoffered?
I don't have that at the top of my mind, Bill. I know that we always work in close coordination with to offer those as soon as we possibly can. And I can get back to you after the meeting when I verify whether that will be next month or whether that will be in January or later.
No, that's fine. It sounds like they will be reoffered and shortly. Appreciate that. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, in the packet for your approval today are 11 sales totaling 53.7 million board feet. These minimum bids total $20.8 million. And I want to remind you that since 2 of these are delivered log sales or sort sales, that this is those prices include the logging and hauling costs that will then be taken out when I report stumpage values to you after those have been sold. The revenue for these sales will benefit Clallam, Mason, Skagit, and Whatcom counties, as well as the Common School Construction Account, the King County Water Pollution Control Board, and the funds for Agriculture School, Scientific School, Normal School, and University. You receive packets with our notices and maps, as well as all the SEPA comments and responses. The average minimum on these is $20.8 million. Do you have any questions on our current packet for approval?
I don't. Just a curiosity, future meeting question. These come in at like 39 to 40 cents a board foot because these prices are pretty good relative to some prior markets. I'm just curious, across all product lines, I know it's a complex question, there's a lot out there. What is the ultimate retail value of a board foot on average? Maybe Matt knows this from the industry or somebody else. Again, it comes in lots of different products, but I'm just curious, if we start at 40 cents, where does this end in terms of the value chain?
So you're asking about the value for things like building materials, plywood, construction lumber, as well as cabinets, furniture, all of those types of products that the wood ends up getting manufactured into?
Right. I mean, that's complex to figure out that aggregate, but if we knew 2 or 3 typical products, where does this end up in the timber plywood world? Even that would help me understand the market, the larger market environment that creates this demand.
Absolutely. So Chris, I'd love to get back to you next month with something more detailed about that. What I can tell you is that in terms of the market demand, it depends on the species that we're offering as well as the quality that we're offering. So some of the higher quality wood gets turned into very high quality veneers and plywoods, as well as high quality building materials such as beams that are valued in architecture and in modern building construction. We also have, depending on the products, alder and maple that are used in furniture and cabinetry that have a different value associated with that. And we have our building materials such as the lower grade Douglas fir and the hemlock materials. But I would love to talk with my purchasers and be able to provide you some of the things that they're very proud of that they produce, the wood products that end up serving all of us in our homes and our furniture and our built environment.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Ralph, I'm not saying any other questions by board members, but Ralph, do you see Miguel Perez Gibson back on?
Yes, he's back on.
Wonderful. Miguel, we're going to let you come in now. Sorry that it didn't work earlier, but go ahead and if you can give your public comments.
Thank you, Commissioner. I had technical difficulties. Can you hear me now? Oh, great. Okay. Well, yes, I wanted to comment on timber sales. So first, good morning, Commissioner and board members. I am Miguel Perez Gibson with State Forest Policy Advisor for Washington Environmental Council. Today you will be approving, or you may have already approved, the Bronco timber sale, and similar to Good Golly that you approved earlier. The Bronco sale holds opportunities to expand DNR's marbled murrelet long-term conservation strategy, like many other sales that may be coming before you. And as the board approves these sales, we just wanted to point them out. So many ways we feel like we lose the opportunity to maintain conservation once we sell these sales, but we recognize they are coming down the pike. But they're a reminder to us, I think, that there's still vital work for us to do to create solutions that both conserve habitat for endangered species and support local communities. Having said that, I think also we want to acknowledge, particularly when a region, in this case the Northwest region, does I think a pretty good job of trying to do both. The sale does include a lot of old growth remnants, and we pointed that out to the region, and we were happy to learn from them that their biologists recognize that. And many of those trees that were 50 inch and above, or 50 inch, 48 inches were set aside, so they'll continue to support the ecological functions that they support. And also there was an occupied site that was nearby that they buffered, and we were thankful for that. So we were pleased to learn of the steps they did take. But why we bring these sales up to the board is we feel that the existing strategy kind of barely mitigates for the murrelets that are endangered. And so we think it's important that the board know what the schedule is of these sales as they come forward, and to encourage the regions, all the regions, to provide the kind of guidance that these sales, that a little lighter touch can help mitigate for the logging that's occurring in the interim, while we try to look for solutions that allow us to treat these sales a little differently in terms of maintaining the ecological functions they provide. So also just, I guess, kudos to the district forester out there who put this sale up. Want to acknowledge that. So thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. We waited to do any motion on the timber sales till after all public comments were in. With that, unless there's any comments or questions by the board members, is there a motion?
Move to approve all sales as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve all sales be approved for auction. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And I think motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kashari. Next up is public comments for land transaction action items. First up to speak, we have Matt Kamiski, followed by Russ Pfeiffer.
All right. Good morning once again. This time I have a green microphone on my end, and I got the little voice that said I'm unmuted. So good morning. For the record, once again, Matt Kamiski, AFRC. Today I wanted to talk to you about the Middle Fork Trust Land Transfer Proposal. Just wanted to highlight a few things. The proposal shows a land value of $302 per acre. That's not the market value needed to replace the asset. And if you look at the trust land performance assessment, you'll see later, this is a little bit of a wonky comparison, but if you just look at the non-market recreation value that the trust land performance assessment gives, that should still give us at least a $352 per acre value on this parcel that will be transferred out of management into the Middle Fork Snoqualmie NRCA. Trust land transfer continues the loss of the corpus of the trust. Replacement values are not adequate to replace acreage removed from management. Delays in acquisition means buying less replacement assets because you're using dollars with less purchasing power due to inflation. Extremely low interest rates. We still do have underlying inflation causing problems. Does not evaluate the impacts to future generations. So it raises some questions about intergenerational equities. We can't just assume it'll all work out. And even the encumbered lands replacement process needed to develop concepts not using trust land transfer in order to avoid opposition from the Washington State School Directors Association. If we look at it from an ecological perspective, it reminds me of the Thomas Sowell quote, there are no solutions, just trade-offs. Trust land transfer does not analyze ecological trade-offs of no management versus management. Simply look at the forest health crisis on federal lands, especially those that are not managed or have limited management. Do we really want to replicate that on state-owned lands? Do we really want to import more of the wood products we can grow and manufacture here under existing strict regulatory environment and imports from places that might have less stringent regulations? Are we willing to accept the current and future impacts from non-managed lands on the environment? Clearly, we do not want to accept that from federal lands, so why should we expect it from state-owned lands? In closing, any trust manager needs a tool to repossession underperforming assets. We firmly believe, though, that the trust land program as it sits is broken and fails the beneficiaries and ultimately their customers. Please keep this in mind as you hear the presentation on trust land performance assessment later on, and we look forward to working with DNR and the beneficiaries to find a model that works. Thank you.
Russ Pfeiffer-Hoyt.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are.
Good morning, Commissioner France and members of the board. First of all, I wanted to congratulate both Commissioner France and Superintendent Reckdahl for your successful re-elections. Today really is just another Tuesday, in contrast with last month. I'm Russ Pfeiffer-Hoyt, Chair of the Washington State School Directors Association Trust Lands Advisory Committee. I'm speaking today about the proposed Bow Hill and Middle Fork Snoqualmie transfers. Bow Hill is a 526-acre parcel close to I-5. The meeting materials indicate that this property is not best suited for timber management. The DNR is a trust management agency, not just a timber management agency. Timber has been and is and will be the core of the trust revenue generation, but future development land is a scarce but valuable resource for the trust. We should consider holding this property for a zoning change. The proposed value of $1,232 per acre, very close to I-5, seems low for an area that's rapidly developing. Selling the property at public auction would tell us whether this valuation is accurate. The Middle Fork Snoqualmie transfer is located close to I-90, not far from the wealthiest part of Washington State. If this parcel were sold at public auction, it's hard to believe that it wouldn't receive a bid greater than the proposed transfer of, I figured out $309 an acre. Matt said 302, so I give it another $7, but still it's on the low side. I'm concerned about preserving and increasing the corpus of the trust. Careful management of transition land in the Puget Sound corridor is vital to increasing the trust value. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Cynthia Wilkinson, followed by Robin Hamill.
Good morning. This is Cynthia Wilkinson. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you. So good morning, Commissioner France and the members of the board. I'm Cynthia Wilkinson, Lands Division Manager for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm here to talk with you and testify in support of the Big Bend Wildlife Area in-holdings transaction. So this is a little over 1,300 acres and 4 different parcels. You'll be hearing about that in just a moment. We're really pleased to be here in partnership and represent the collaboration that has occurred here between RCO as a funding source and DNR and DFW. So these properties are embedded in our existing Big Bend Wildlife Area, which is a bit over 20,000 acres in Douglas County. They provide an important connectivity link especially for sharp-tailed grouse populations between Douglas, Okanagan, and Lincoln counties. And the transfer of these properties to DFW provides a strategic component to maintain and recover sharp-tailed grouse within these counties. As I said, I think this is a great testament to our collaborative effort. It makes a whole lot of sense for the public that these sort of scattered DNR lands would be integrated into our wildlife area and managed consistent with what's happening there. It just makes sense, you know, for the landscape, for the connectivity, for the species and the habitats, and really just better positions the properties for effective operation and management. So just pleased that we are moving forward with this, and especially with the concern for shrub step in light of, you know, continuing challenges and this season's fires. This is a good move all around. In addition, obviously ask for your support for the transaction, and we would like to acknowledge and appreciate the work of Robin Hamill for the transaction. That's what I've got. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Robin Hamill?
I'm actually one of the presenters. I think this just
there you go. I was going to get you 2 bites. I get an extra.
I already got 2 transactions. I'm good.
Okay, yeah, I get it. I'm tracking this now. This is what you showed up in the comment. So I think what we do have Scott Schuyler with the Upper Skagit Tribe who will be also providing Mr. Bow Hill. I'm going to take and have him provide comments to the board outside of public comments, just for details. So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Robin, and followed then by Bob and then Deb. So Robin, I'm going to have you present first, then I ask Mr. Schuyler to be able to join and comments.
Got to mute. Can everybody see my screen? And were you broke up a little bit there, Commissioner. Were you going to have Scott give comments first then?
No, I was going to actually have you present first, because he's going to provide more historical and context for it. And I think grounding of the board member and the public in the project itself will help. And then I will let Mr. Schuyler step in.
Thank you very much. All right, so today my presentation is on the Bow Hill transaction located in Skagit County. So this property is a common school trust. It's in Skagit County, and it is about a mile off of I-5. And it is adjacent to other Upper Skagit Indian tribe. If you can see my cursor and all that yellow, that's what is owned by the tribe currently. The property itself is plus or minus 526. It's actually, I believe, 525.5. So if you see 525 or 526, that's why. It's an odd shape. That's why I have a little bit of pink, so you can see like that this is a home site in this. There is an oil pipeline that runs from north to south on this parcel. There are also 3 roads. This is Hobson Road, this is Bow Hill Road, and this is Erskine Road along the western edge. Since 2010, there have been 2 timber sales on the site, which is the majority of the timber. The first one was auctioned in December 2010, and that was the Hobson Creek Barrier Retention, which covered a good portion of the southern portion of the site. And then in July 2013, DNR auctioned the Dodge Flats hardwood sale, which covered the northern half of the portion. This was a rather complex sale in that most of this area is actually a lot of wetlands. This general site right here is not actually due to harvest. That over the last 30 years, if you were to look back and look at aerials, just does not grow timber. It's pasture land because of the high water table and ponding. This is zoned rural residential or rural resource, which means there's only 1 house site per 40 acres. In addition, the county has a mineral resource overlay on this parcel, but we did have a geologist review the parcel and there are no minerals on site. And as a side note, this parcel may look familiar to you, board members. This was in their packet because this is on the transition lands list. The appraised value was $648,000. I know there's been talk of other uses. However, the appraiser felt after much research that the highest and best use was still considered forestry, considering the high water table, the ponding, the streams, and many other access. They also found no evidence that dividing and subdividing for 40-acre home plots was in the best interest of any developer at this point. The benefits to disposing of this property now is that it's difficult to manage. We've harvested most everything that needs to be harvested off of it. In the next 10 years, it'll be 30 to 40 years before DNR could conceivably harvest again. It allows us to take that money and better invest it in other forest timberland or other land that would produce money for the trust. And of course, this is common school trust, so this would go back to those purchases. Are there any questions that I can answer before Scott talks? All right, I will mute myself.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and proceed with your additional information and discussion points, and then we'll go back to the team. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner friends and honorable board members. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the Bow Hill transfer. The Bow Hill, Padilla, Edison, Samish, Chucknut, Warner Prairie, these are all historical lands of the territory of the Nuwaha Band of the Upper Skagit. The Nuwaha were also referred to the Stick Samish. We inhabited the uplands of the Samish River Basin, including Bow. My ancestor, Perez, signed the treaty with the United States in January 22nd, 1855, reserving our rights in the Bow Hill area. Upper Skagit members, after the treaty time, when we were dispersed from our ancestral locations, sought to receive Indian allotment lands in this area. And many Upper Skagits were successful in Bow and did receive allotments, I believe in the 1800s. So many of these lands that are adjacent to the property in questions have been held by Upper Skagit members or the tribe for decades now, and most are undeveloped, as the area is wetlands, of course. Also, affiliations that we have with the area. We have 2 tribal cemeteries in the area. One of them was a cemetery from our smallpox victims that died from the smallpox epidemic of the late 1800s and were brought up from Warner Prairie and buried on Bow Hill. Also, too, when I-5 was built, Upper Skagit graves were encountered and were relocated to the adjacent properties to the property in question. The Guardian Spirit Stone, I sent the picture to the DNR. This was the protector of the Upper Skagit Nuwaha village, and it was recovered from Bow Hill. It's actually on display at our tribal office. Once the pandemic's over, anybody can come look at that amazing artifact. In the 1940s, the Upper Skagit chairman, his name was Bow Hill, in fact, because he resided in the Friday Creek area, and that's where his family came from. So we have a distinct historical affiliation with this area, and these lands, have value to us to preserve and protect that cultural affiliation. You know, we're here to ask that the DNR board we respectfully ask that the DNR board approve this transfer with the understanding that we will continue to be a responsible steward of these lands. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Robin, I'll turn it back to Will. I'll turn it, I guess, to board members. If there's any questions regarding the Bow Hill transfer. All right.
This is Bill Peach.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Commissioner Peach.
Thank you kindly. I'm interested. First, I very much support the tribe's involvement in managing this property. I do have questions with regard to the valuation, and I'm not sure who to direct it to, but one question I have deals with present net worth calculation of the land value, and did that include future distribution of funds to the schools? You know, it's common for a PNW analysis to look at the current, well, to look at the cash flow associated with the transaction from the perspective of the landowner. But I'm asking about the perspective of the beneficiaries. Is there a consideration in the calculation for future cash flows to beneficiaries?
I don't know that.
Go ahead, Robin, and then Angus, and I'm happy to jump in too, but go ahead. We'll start with you, Robin. Angus, I might call on you to add in, given this is part of a larger focus on lands that are underperforming and the opportunity to take that funding and get to lands that can perform at a higher rate for the benefit.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Angus,
that's exactly what I was going to was ask Angus to please step in at this point and help out on that question. This is definitely above me.
This is Brock. Do you want me to jump in here?
Oh, Brock, you would be a great person also.
Yeah, this is part of not seeing anybody but my board members. So go ahead. Go ahead, Brock. Come on in and I'll add a few comments. Go ahead.
Well, thanks, Commissioner. So, Commissioner Peach, I won't be able to directly answer that. I'll be able to, I think, provide a little more context on the parcel itself that Robin has touched on. This parcel is quite wet, as Robin mentioned. It was already difficult for us to manage, and we actually, the DNR, spent a period of time trying to see if it could be rezoned or better positioned as, you know, for a different use. And after a long period of time of looking at that, decided that wasn't the right route forward for it, that it wasn't going to work out. In addition to what Robin kind of, you know, or I guess reflecting back on a couple of things that Robin mentioned already, all of the harvestable wood is off of this property, and we wouldn't anticipate more revenue coming off this for 40 years or potentially longer. You know, those were done through harvest in 2010 and 2013. And so we don't, you know, while there is potential revenue far off, it's quite a ways off. And we see this as, you know, best owned by the Upper Skagit, and for us to be able to take this opportunity to reposition our assets to, you know, either blocking out forestry or investing in other land that would yield a higher revenue for the trust. I'll pause there in case Angus wants to add something. Or Commissioner.
Commissioner Peach, I'm hearing you, Stephanie, but I think it's you here. We have identified assets within our portfolio, quite a number of them. We brought that list to the board members at an earlier meeting that were low-performing assets across the state with the goal of increasing the amount of funds we have available to go out and buy more strategic parcels, whether that's strategic parcels because of the value of working forest land adjacent to existing working forest land, whether it's high-value agriculture, whether it's high-value commercial, industrial, as we see changing land use patterns, population growth, et cetera, and also the diversification of the portfolio. Much of this is very much in alignment with our trust land performance assessment and the diversification of our portfolio, but also more strategic positioning of land for management and for revenue generation.
Thank you. I have no issue with regard to the disposition to the Upper Skagit tribe and support the transaction because of that. But in the other transactions that are proposed, I'll be asking similar evaluation questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, board members, are there any other questions or is there a motion?
Move to approve the Bow Hill transaction.
I'm not sure I heard a second, but.
Second.
Great, that was clear. All right, it has been moved and seconded to resolution 1570. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
And the motion and the motion passes. I want to thank the Upper Skagit tribe for all their work on this, and I think this is it's a great honor to be able to restore back a very significant property to you at the same time of helping serve the larger interests of the trust beneficiaries. Robin and DNR team, thank you for your work on this. I know it's been a significant process.
Hi, Shka. Thank you.
Thank you all. All right. My next transaction is the Big Bend. It is a direct transfer in Douglas County to Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. The Big Bend is also Common School Trust. It is in Douglas County. The properties themselves are about 10 miles north of Grand Coulee, which is right here. These are 4 little parcels with a total acreage of about 1,360. A little bit closer overview. By looking at the map, you can see that all of these parcels highlighted in red are common school, and they're all either edge holdings or in holdings within the green, which is the Big Bend wildlife area. This area has this wildlife area was acquired by DFW through RCO grants over the last 7 to 10 years. This was 3 different grants. Currently, this last part of the grant is funded through a 2016 grant called the Mid-Columbia WWRP grant, which allowed Fish and Wildlife to acquire the last 7,200 acres of this 20,000 acre wildlife area. There are a couple of grazing leases that are applied to parcel 1, 2, and 4. DFW has agreed to take those grazing leases and assume those as part of the transaction. Now on to the parcels. Parcel 1 is approximately 284 acres, although there's only about 200 acres of usable space. Everything near the river is granted to the USA for an overflow easement. In this particular case, that means DNR can do nothing with the land. There's no structures. The US government has almost complete and total control of the property, so nothing can be done within that area close to the river. The rent for this parcel, which also includes parcel number 2, is a little over $1,100 per year. This is a DNR in holding, so everything around this parcel is owned by Fish and Wildlife, and the only access, legal access to this parcel is through an interagency agreement with Fish and Wildlife. Parcel 2 is 360 acres. There is legal access to this parcel through the county road, which is Stall Road, that runs right through here. It is leased together with parcel number 1, and it is a DNR edge holding. Fish and Wildlife owns everything around the outside of this parcel. Parcel 3 is 640 acres. It is a complete DNR in holding. There is no legal access to the site, and it hasn't been leased since 2009. Parcel number 4 is 80 acres. It's got an annual rent of $155. It is a DNR edge holding, and there is no legal access. Fish and Wildlife owns everything on the outside over here. The total appraised value is $331,000. I want to acknowledge to the board members that I found an error in my presentation this morning. Those parcel numbers and the parcel values were mixed up. The appraiser's numbering and my numbering were off, and therefore, Bill, you probably did have some definite questions on the appraised values, but these are the more appropriate and correct values. The average price is approximately $250 per acre. And just so you know, these appraisals are done since it's through an RCO grant. I'm not sure how familiar many of you are with this. To have an RCO grant, this has to be an outside appraisal, and there has to be an outside appraisal review of both appraisals, which means there's 2 independent appraisers that come to this valuation price. And this is something that Fish and Wildlife has to do as part of their RCO grant. The benefits to this parcel or to this transaction is that DNR will be able to move out of properties that bring in very little income for the trust and be able to grant us money to purchase better suited revenue generating parcels. In addition, this is a good partnership with DFW to transfer ownership to them in a wildlife area for parcels that make sense. DNR is not going to have good future rental income from the properties within a wildlife refuge. Are there any questions I can answer about this?
This is Bill Peach.
Hello, Bill.
I'm very familiar with land valuation, and in the previous transaction I asked the question, is the present net worth calculation of the property, including not only the cash flows associated with timber harvest, but the cash flows that beneficiaries receive. Do you know, because there is the additional requirement for appraisers, whether the second issue I've mentioned, the cash flow to beneficiaries, is part of the calculation?
I do not know. I can tell you that they did look at if the leasing potential had an impact on this. The average rent is $2 per acre. It would take a long time for DNR to recoup that amount of costs for the sale price that we're getting. But as for your question, I don't think that's part of the appraisal process with RCO. That would come more for something that DNR would work with. And I would have to look further at that appraisal to get back to you, which I can.
No, that's fine. I just bring to the attention of all of the board members the issue that I have presented, the present net worth of cash flows to beneficiaries. Thank you very much.
So this is Brock again, Commissioner Peach, and I just wanted to chime in. This is, I know you're very familiar with appraisals, and we're really predominantly using like a sales comparison here, right? So what people are getting per acre in the area. And as Robin mentioned, you know, some of these are either have low rent or landlocked and we can't lease them out. So it's really been a sales comparison analysis for what people are looking for in the area more than anything else.
No, I'm very familiar with comparative sales analysis and appreciate the fact that it was looked at. Can you tell me, was there consideration to offer this parcel for a public bid?
I don't know. There wasn't, because we had, you know, where it's located and how it worked out. WDFW stepped forward and asked to work with us on it, and so we didn't look into offering that through public bid.
There are also another consideration, and I'm not sure if the board members are all aware. For DNR to auction parcels, they have to be under a certain size limit. They have to be under 160 acres for DNR to set them out at auction, which would require then, some of these parcels are larger than that. We would have to go in and subplat that prior to taking it to a public auction to sell it to a private entity.
And I think what Robin was saying on right here is that this is Brock again, for DNR to be able to move these at public auction versus working with WDFW, there are certain things we would have to do to set those up that quite frankly cost a lot of time and money. So one is what Robin pointed out. Another is that all of these parcels, in order to go through public auction and us be able to use that money to acquire new lands, would have to go through the land bank, which we've talked about a time or two with the board, and you will be seeing more transactions that, you know, involve the land bank really in the next few months. We should be seeing some of those, but there are so many hurdles to that that the costs of doing so just begin to outweigh the value, particularly in these, you know, low acre value parcels like we're talking about here with the Big Bend Exchange, and in particular where we have some of these that we don't even have access to.
So I don't consider the access issue as inhibiting the value. There are laws dealing with ingress and egress, but I heard an interesting comment about a criteria, a constraint you work with that is relative to the size of the transaction. Can you please share with me, is that a policy or is that a RCW?
I believe it's
Go ahead.
I believe it's an RCW. I can look it up and send it to you, Bill.
I actually
Could you do that, please?
I believe it's in our Constitution, Bill.
Oh, that far.
No small test. I'll just interject. I think this is highlighting one of the things that will come out of our trust land performance assessment is how us as a government agency have a lot of our hands tied in a lot of ways. This is just one of them. Others are the length of our leases, how we put it to market, what things we can put to market. So I'll just interject with that I think, Commissioner Peach, you're truly highlighting one of the barriers that limits us getting, you know, more significant value and better value for our beneficiaries.
Thank you.
Board members, I feel like you're dropping like flies. I only got 3 left I can visually see here. Just with that, thank you. There, I haven't lost everyone yet. I want to see, is there any other comments, questions, or do we have a motion regarding Big Bend?
Move to approve Resolution 1571.
It's been moved and I believe seconded. Yes. For approve Resolution 171, all those in favor say aye.
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 Well, thank you very much, members of the board.
Thank you, Robin. Next up, I believe we have Bob with presenting Middle Fork.
This is Bob. Hopefully this presentation will come up in a moment. Give me a thumbs up when you see it. Right, can you see the presentation at this time?
We don't see it, but we see the light at the end of the tunnel, Bob.
All right.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. So now I can get started. This will be the Middle Fork Snoqualmie Trust Line Transfer Project located in King County. This is one of 2 trust line transfer projects that will occur this biennium. This is the first one. It's a smaller one, and we haven't had one for a little bit, so just want to go over how the projects work with trust land transfer. The legislature buys out the value of the trust lands with the timber value going into the common school construction account to buy replacement schools, and the land value being paid for through the legislative money. And that buys replacement trust lands, either typically timber or agriculture. It'll generate higher revenue in the future and more fitting spot. Right here is the town of North Bend, just north of the cursor is I-90, and here's the property. It's near Middle Fork Snoqualmie NRCA and Mount Si NRCA. The overall property is outlined in the slide in red. It's 25.88 acres. The adjacent lands that are shown in green are Middle Fork Snoqualmie NRCA, and the proposal transfer would be adding to that. This property has been leased for many years for recreation. There's an existing recreational encumbrance until 2026, so DNR could not sell it prior to 2026 at auction. DNR will continue to manage it once it transfers to NRCA for recreation up until minimum 2026. It'll just be managed wholly for natural areas purposes after that. To the north of this property is the Middle Fork Snoqualmie River with the ensuing setback or riparian setback from the river. In the south end of the property, there's also a stream with riparian encumbrances with it. This property is valued 2 different ways. There's been a lot of discussion about valuation today. One way this was valued was comparable sales. The property doesn't have any utilities. It'd be an off-grid home site. There's no utilities close by within miles. So the value in comparable sales of an off-grid home site was $90,000. In the income approach, the typical way timber's looked at, it came out $140,000. So DNR recommends transferring it to $140,000 value instead of $90,000. So the highest and best use was as timberland. That gave it the resulting lower timberland value. This property benefit fish and wildlife at the Middle Fork Snoqualmie NRCA. Timber value would go toward building replacement common schools. The land value would buy replacement trust assets elsewhere. This last image is not of the site. It's higher up elevation, but it's in the same NRCA. This is looking towards the west, towards North Bend, and towards the Mount Si NRCA. Are there any questions about this Middle Fork Snoqualmie Trust Line Transfer Project?
Bob, can you talk to me about the timber, the age of the timber, and how that was valued?
Yeah, it was between 8 and 9 acres of net merchantable timber on the property, and it was basically the age of the timber was I think it was about 70 years old. It might have been a little bit older. Anyway, it's a kind of a little donut hole in between the river to the north and the stream to the south. Right in the center is where the merchantable timber was. And most of it was western hemlock. There's 4 different species, but the vast majority of the volume was western hemlock, with some cedar, some Douglas fir, and some maple.
So the value of the timber, if you look at the transactions that DNR has had recently, Do you have any sense for the volume and the current market value of that volume?
Yeah, it was 300 and something MBF. Anyway, I could look it up if need be. So it fit the appraisals a few months dated. So prices rose slightly from when it was originally appraised, but not that significantly for this area. Prices went up really high, as you heard, and then, of course, then they dropped back down somewhat recently. So it was a reasonable price on the timber. In part, there's a couple different ways. You can always look at the spot price of timber. You look at a 12-month rolling average, 24-month rolling average. Anyway, there's a lot of different ways to look at timber. It was originally appraised, but not that significantly for this area. Prices went up really high, as you heard, and then, of course, then they dropped back down somewhat recently. So it was a reasonable price on the timber. In part, there's a couple different ways. You can always look at the spot price of timber. You look at a 12-month rolling average, 24-month rolling average. Anyway, there's a lot of different ways to look at timber, but it was a spot price at the time of the appraisal.
So there's a little over 25 acres, and there was 300 MBF.
Right.
And that is based on what age as a harvestable age?
Right. The net operable acres were between 8 and 9 acres. So while there's 26 acres, most of it's riparian encumbrance. So most of it cannot be harvested under forest practice law. So it was about 40 MBF per acre on the net merchantable acres.
And how many net merchantable acres were there?
Between 8 and 9.
That's amazing. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at slide 4 and the view of this from an aerial perspective. And I do see a stream, I do see a river, but why are so many acres encumbered?
On it, it's a flat river plain, so there's little water braids in this river plain. So basically on the timber appraisal, I didn't conduct it myself, but by the time you buffer out from the river's also there in the south along with the stream. You buffer out from the river, you buffer out from the stream. There's just not much net acres left.
And so, Bob, same philosophical question I've asked in the other two transactions. In calculation of the present net worth of the property, has there been a component of value that's associated with a future cash flow to beneficiaries, in addition to the current timber value, or the future valuation of the timber value? Two separate components of value.
The present value that was applied, 140,000. The 132,000 was the present value of the merchantable timber. Then present value of the land was the 8,000 in the forestry environment. Like I say, there wasn't any speculative future value discounted back. So if that's where you're going, if DNR would have gone with the lower value, the 90,000 instead of 140,000, the land value would have been between $3,000 and $4,000 per acre, which sounds better. But at the end of the day, it's a lower price, a lower value.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Right.
No, Commissioner Franz, I believe I've made my point. Thank you.
Are there any other questions in regard to Middle Fork DLT?
All right. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 1572?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve Resolution 1572. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next item.
There we go. Good morning, Commissioner and members of the board. I am giving a presentation to you today on the Trustland Performance Assessment along with Angus. And there he is. He's been having difficulty accessing his microphone. So can you?
I don't know whether you can hear me or not. Can you?
Yes.
Hey, Angus, maybe I missed it, but did we do Land at Bank Exchange 2019 Resolution 1573? I'm wondering if I did.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. I just having also microphone.
Sorry, Kristen. I just want to make sure we covered every item, and maybe I.
Yes.
No, that's great.
The Land Bank Exchange got taken off into this one,
So item number 4, 1573, not happening.
Yeah, the Land Bank. So the Land Bank Exchange is going to be in a future month.
Okay, well, there you go. All right. Well, see, I am on my toes, but just maybe a little bit behind, I guess. All right, thank you, everyone. Let's move over. Kristen, I'm going to move to chair. I got to do public comments for chair report.
Sure.
Now that I know this, you're just throwing me more curveballs than I'm ready for in December. All right, with that, we're going to first up for public comments for chair report is Rod Fleck, followed by Matt Kamiski, followed by Miguel Perez Gibson. Get your mics ready, everyone. Rod, take it away.
Good morning, Commissioner and members of the Board of Natural Resources, and congratulations to two of you on your November successes. Focusing on the chair's report today, and I really want to emphasize to the board as you go through this that to keep in mind that most of the lands that are going to be talked about are located in rural communities and are rural lands. And that's vital. I also want to kind of throw it's Article 16, Section 4 of the state constitution that has a limit on the size of lands and also has a platting restriction. And it's not a universal platting restriction. Those lands all must have been within a couple miles of a city. And it would have been probably helpful had that been highlighted and noted, which will tie into my concerns about the report and certain pages that are just a few words about how we should go and change some of these things. It's interesting, intriguing, and concerning, and I would like a copy, like Ed made a request for the report materials that might have been given to the board in their packet beyond this this presentation being shared with the public. I'd be remiss to note that on page 15, you'll see something that reflects a constant concern and worry for our West End community. The huge impact of the last 25 years on the value of return on the timber asset. It's something we constantly testified about, myself and numerous others that have already testified here. And I would say ghosts I can see in my mind from Board of Natural Resource meetings over the last 25, 26 years. Pages 21, I'll just also note that many times when we were raising our concerns about this, there's always seemed to be a way to justify away those specific concerns about the decrease in revenues or the decrease in the return on the value of the asset. That hopefully this and the county's report will highlight that, well, we weren't that wrong out here in the wilderness. Page 21 through 24 is one of these that creates great interest, great concern, and great worry. The worry, for example, is if the harvest calculation cannot be met, how then could a loan be repaid? And that's something to keep in mind when you start seeing discussions about finance, loans, etc. Also, I think of great interest is how you'd monetize ecosystem services, and that will be an interesting discussion because that's being had elsewhere in a couple places I'm involved with. Concerns, the loan to smooth the revenue with regard to state forest lands. There's a concern as to how you would sell those. Again, the Constitution provision that was part of the discussion on state school lands and grant lands is really a wise one to look at. I would highly recommend, and I'm sending it on to Commissioner Peach, the 5 or 6 pages of Justice Utter's and Mr. Spitzer's The Washington State Constitution, a reference guide, because it talks about some of the conflicts that were going on in the period of the 1880s and why some of those provisions are in there to avoid a speedy and, some might argue, not as well thought out sale of public lands for a short-term upfront benefit. The trust land transfer issues remain huge, as you heard testified and sign up for that, knowing who had said they were going to. And then also, I would say it's intriguing and a concern is the outreach program and the strategy as to how to avoid an urban-centric delivery base on land policy that would have huge ripple impacts on small rural communities such as those of the West End. It'll be interesting to see the legislative proposals mentioned as well, and I'm hoping if the board has those in their packet for this meeting that the public will be given a copy of those. If not, I'll just make that request now. And as you proceed in these discussions for April through December, I'd be very interested to see the rollout of how a broader group of the public is engaged in these discussions, especially in the rural communities and counties, much more like the Commissioner's big table meeting she had a few summers back than this. Thank you.
Miguel.
All right, it looks like Commissioner Franz froze on my end, but this is Matt, not Miguel. I think that was the order was Rod, Matt, and Miguel.
Yeah, I said Matt Kamiski followed by Miguel.
So good morning once again, Matt Kamiski, AFRC. Just wanted to kind of, first note that these comments are related to the presentation as we've not had a chance, as has been mentioned by others, to really dig into the actual report. So once we can get into the actual more details and stuff, maybe some of these perceptions may shift. But clearly, I think from looking at this, it identifies what many of us have known for a long time was the need to improve business practices at DNR. I would caution the board and others when comparing net revenue values with the non-market, for lack of a better term, pseudo-GDP analysis for ecosystem services and recreation. To me, it's kind of like comparing grapefruits and old Ford pickup trucks. I would say that on the non-market values, it does appear to be some good news in that it looks like current management practices and policies is producing positive outcomes. Though I would caution folks from making any conclusions about how those directly benefit the beneficiaries. I am working on some 2018 very good data from a county to show how recreation and tourism funnels down to junior taxing districts. I will give you the spoiler, it doesn't. So more to come on that in the future. I would like to flag, at least from the presentation, I maybe picked up on some tones, and hopefully I'm wrong here, maybe a little bit of a loss of focus on the trust mandate and fiscal obligations and some of the proposed future concepts, especially undivided loyalty, and maybe a little bit of a desire to shift into more cool and easier to manage assets than forestry. I think we need to look at the entire timber program when we look at, reduced timber revenues. Puts a question in my mind of why private timber companies find value in managing timber, but DNR struggles to increase beneficiary value from timber lands. As I mentioned earlier, concerns over TLT. Really nervous about community forests. The two that DNR currently manages are not self-sustaining, have not produced, do not produce revenue to local communities, no wood fiber in the marketplace, and very limited jobs. So I'm not sure if that's really a good outcome and solution to trust land management to benefit local communities, especially the rural communities where many of these lands exist. So ultimately, we look forward to getting under the hood of the report when it's available to the public, and look forward to identifying processes that strengthen the program for the beneficiaries, the customers, and the communities that benefit from the public services and jobs provided by these assets. Thank you.
Miguel Gibson.
Okay, looks like I'm unmuted. Hello once again. For the record, I am Miguel Perez Gibson, Forest Policy Analyst for Washington Environmental Council. Regarding the trust land performance assessment, on a personal basis, I guess, Commissioner, I got to reflect. 24 years ago, I was sitting down at a Starbucks on a Saturday finishing up the last one. So here I am again. And anyway,
I didn't know there was
go.
a bunch 24. Good to know that. Just kidding.
It was the same one, downtown Olympia. It's the same one. I think it's boarded up though at the moment. Anyway, I digress. So yes, we are hopeful that this new assessment will provide new information on how to meet the needs of our current economic, social, and climate realities, and move from our sort of business as usual to developing a new way of looking at managing these forests. And as you've heard from other speakers, we look forward to kind of diving in and looking at the results. I will have, I do have 3 points I'd like to make though. Again, a little bit unfairly since I haven't read the report, but we hope that we can move, the board can move towards thinking beyond just volume. DNR, the board needs to focus more on how more value can be captured. You heard about this as well, I guess, from other speakers, but increase the ratio of value to volume. Let's try that on for size. I'll give you some real world example. I've had my suspenders and chainsaw out here recently. My son and daughter-in-law manage 140 acres of forest land, and we logged about 14 acres. We sold our alder, 3- and 4-face Carolina alder, for $1,500 per thousand by marketing to people who were looking for slicers. They resold them to a company a mill in Pennsylvania. I don't know what they got for it. They wouldn't disclose. We also sold some small chunks of maple for guitar figure wood that was like $10,000 a thousand. Of course, we only had a couple chunks, but still, my point is that there is value to be found, and part of that will necessitate investing in DNR staff and DNR expertise to help us be more creative and find more ways of how do we maximize the value. Case in point, I bought a 2x4 last year, cost me $2.35. This year they're $7 at the big box stores. Why? Increase in residential construction, low mortgage rates, spurred residential building. So the DNR, how much of that value did DNR able to capture? And then you ask yourself, well, could we have captured more? Carbon, these forests have much more carbon sequestration and timber production capacity than we are able to capture with a simple 40-year rotation. As we place a price on carbon, I think we'll see a public debate, Commissioner, on how best to utilize those funds, and increasing the carbon and timber volume production by providing a funding that would dampen the loss of NB net present value by carrying the forest longer is worthy of debate and policy discovery. Finally, regarding trust land transfer, license to operate, the license to support. There is a youthquake coming. The millennials will be here shortly. The gerontocracy. I love you, Nancy Pelosi and Charles Schumer and Chuck and Bill McConnell, Senator McConnell, but your days are soon over, and there's going to be a much different view on how we manage these lands. And Commissioner Boyle realized that when he created West Tiger Mountain, Rattlesnake Ridge, provided the opportunity, the license to keep continuing to manage these forests. By trying to log every stick, I think we're going to back ourselves into a political corner that's not going to be good for the forest or for the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the comments. Before I turn this over to Angus, it's good to see you. We were able to get that technology working. First, I want to just ground the board. You will remember this item has been something that I've been pushing for literally before I even sat in the chair as Commissioner of Public Lands. The importance of truly understanding and knowing the full scale of the value of the assets we have, all 3 million acres plus of land, and also not only the value but also the function, not just recently but in the future. There is an enormous amount of change that has happened in the last 20 plus years since the last one was done, not only in population growth but where people have settled, how they shop, how they work. I think COVID shockingly has flipped everything on its head of what we understood about where people are going to work and live and how they're going to get there. Which we are all right now assessing and watching. So this work was a pretty substantial amount of work. We went to the legislature to help fund this work, and we were successful in securing a pretty good amount of at least half of the funding for it. The volume of it is substantial, and I think that frankly, as we look forward to the next 4, 8, 20 years, it sets us up on a roadmap for where we need to go to meet our fiduciary responsibility as well as our responsibilities as managers and stewards of this public land in Washington. So what I want to let you know is we had originally, and I'm the challenge that you hear in the public comments, and I'll be just up front. We originally were ready to just issue the report, get it out there, put a bow on it, stitch it up, seal it, get on with the year 2021. And I actually put a pause to it with the belief that it is such a substantial body of work with enormous amount of information. It is quite voluminous. And believe that our report, our understanding of what Deloitte did in the performance assessment should involve our stakeholders, should bring them into the conversation and inform our own perspective and view as we provide a report to the legislature on this. And so over the last, I'd say sort of beginning of November to over the next couple of weeks, we are doing that stakeholder outreach from everyone from our beneficiaries, FRCs, most of the people you hear comment on a monthly basis to their perspective, their thoughts. We felt that in fairness, so that those conversations weren't happening without you being aware also of the sort of update key findings, we should bring it forward at this meeting. Whether that was the right decision or not, let's figure it out, I guess. My belief, though, is number one, I needed to make sure that our stakeholders, all of the people that really look to our public lands for their value, not only environmentally, economically, and financially, have opportunity to have their voice be heard, have a conversation with our team, and inform the development of natural resources report of the Deloitte & Touche performance assessment. We will, knowing that by the end of this, we will submit the full report to the legislature. It will be available to the public. It'll be in full available to everyone. We obviously are then, our goal will be to go out to a broader audience of the community. You heard that in some of the comments, as well as our legislators. There are elements in there where we will be looking at potential and working with you guys to decide what are policy changes or statutory changes that need to be made that helps us do a better job in managing these assets on behalf of the state of Washington and our beneficiaries. Obviously, COVID always, has sort of challenged us in the understanding of how we do community engagement. Those town hall meetings, community meetings that Rod Fleck referred to have gotten a little bit more difficult. So what that looks like, we don't know at this point in time, but know that that will be a key part also of 2021 And so I look forward to this work and to a continued conversation. This is just one of many that will follow with you as well as with the community. So with that, Angus, I'm going to let you take it away where he is going to sort of just give you, I would say this is a sign of a 40,000 foot level. It is not going to provide you every single detail of the 400 plus, I think it's 400 plus pages of the report. We promise you can have that over the Christmas holiday because you will be bored. You are already been stuck at home for quite some time, but you will now have some great material to read. But he's going to do it at the 40,000 foot level, and then over the period of next year, we will be diving at a more robust level into each sort of different elements of this. So take this as your teaser, I would say. Angus, it's yours.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm just going to do a sound check. Can you hear me okay? Great. So thank you, Commissioner, and members of the board. Just for the record, my name is Angus Brody. I'm the Deputy Supervisor for State Uplands. And Kristen and I are going to tag team on this presentation. Kristen's going to lead it off. This presentation is the presentation that we've been using and providing to beneficiaries and stakeholders as we start the outreach that the Commissioner mentioned. It is very much at the 40,000, 50,000 or even higher level. There is going to be a lot of detail that you're going to find in the final reports that we've not included here. And this is really the introduction, the start of the conversation. As you've heard from some of the public comments today, there are things that people are going to like, what they see in this presentation and in the reports. And those same people are also going to see things that they don't like. And that's totally what we expect. And in fact, if we're seeing that and we're seeing a vast diversity of opinions, that's exactly, I think, where we want to be at this stage in the process. We will spend much of next year having these conversations and digging in deep with both beneficiary groups and with stakeholder groups as we go through and develop a set of proposals at 3 levels that we'll get into through this presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Kristen to lead us through the first part of this presentation. Morning, Kristen.
Great. Thanks, Angus. So for the record, I'm Kristen Olson-Keene. I'm the Projects and Planning Section Assistant Division Manager. Okay, so here's the agenda for the presentation. As the Commissioner had said, I'm providing you with just an introduction to this work. We're finalizing our legislative report, and we're scheduling to deliver that to the legislature by the end of December. And once we deliver the report to the legislature, we will give everyone a chance to read through it. We can post it on both. We'll have a trust land performance assessment site on the DNR site, and we can also post these things on the board. And just as the Commissioner said, the detail is pretty considerable. It's technical, complex, and extensive. We're definitely not going to get through it today, but we are absolutely interested in talking to people and fielding questions and engaging in conversations with the board and stakeholders, beneficiaries, and the legislature. We're going to talk about background, analyses and findings, challenges and opportunities, and initial recommendations, and then next steps. So in order to understand trust land performance assessment, we first need to understand trust lands. The Department of Natural Resources manages 2.9 million acres of state trust lands in Washington. The photos on the right show examples of the types of lands and crops that are grown in these trust lands. In the photos you can see apple orchards, agricultural operations, vineyards, wheat, and some forestry photos. Trust lands are public lands, but they're not very well understood. These lands come with unique legal and fiduciary responsibilities, examples of which are listed here on the slide. DNR is obligated to comply with these responsibilities in managing these trust lands, and as you heard in the comments, we are obligated to generate revenue and other benefits for each trust into perpetuity, as well as maintain undivided loyalty to its beneficiaries. The beneficiaries or trusts are listed on this slide. The table on the left groups the trusts into 2 groups or 2 types. The first is federally granted trusts, which were created for Washington at the time of statehood, and the state forest lands, which were created by the legislature in the 1920s and 30s. And then you can see the proportion of acres across the 2.9 million acres for each trust in the pie chart on the right. Here we can see how the trust land acres break out by asset class. Timber has the most at just over 2 million acres, followed by grazing, other resources, and agriculture. Other resources is a group of smaller assets that includes clean energy, leases for clean energy, special forest products, rights-of-way, and special uses. The acres will add up to more than 2.9 million acres because we can have overlapping uses on the same acre. For example, grazing can occur on timberlands, so those are counted twice. So the trust land performance assessment came out of a clear understanding by the commissioner, the department, the legislature, beneficiaries, and stakeholders that the issue of trust land performance from a revenue and a value perspective required immediate attention. So when Commissioner Franz came into office, she set a clear vision for modernizing state trust lands. The vision includes reforming and enhancing state trust land revenue programs that show promise for immediate growth, such as renewable energy and commercial real estate. She also identified in the agency's 2018 strategic plan the need to optimize the near and long-term state trust land performance of the trust portfolio for the benefit of current and future beneficiaries. In addition to the commissioner, the department has also built an understanding of key issues facing trust land management. We've made the following observations: that we're having difficulty with revenues keeping up with costs. We saw with the muralette and the two last West Side Sustainable Harvest calculations, we heard from beneficiaries who told us about the problems with sufficient and reliable revenue. We've been seeing increasing conflicts over revenue generating activities. We are experiencing a lack of tools to take advantage of trust business opportunities that we know are out there. And in many cases, DNR has had to employ inefficient business processes to comply with outdated statutes. So in 2018, DNR worked with the legislature to craft direction to conduct an assessment of trust land performance, which eventually ended up as a capital budget proviso. DNR and the legislature jointly funded this comprehensive assessment of the asset classes listed on the right. And as you can see, the direction from this assessment included conducting an asset valuation of trust lands, including estimating fair market value of those lands, as well as the gross and net income produced by those asset classes, conducting a valuation of ecosystem services and recreation, and providing recommendations for improvement. DNR contracted out pieces of this work and has been conducting its own work. So DNR hired Deloitte Transactions and Business Analytics to conduct the trust portfolio valuation. Deloitte then subcontracted with Earth Economics to assess the non-market environmental benefits and values provided by state trust lands. And then DNR is taking the findings from those reports as well as an array of studies that DNR has conducted previously and is summarizing them. In addition, we're conducting our own analysis to identify challenges and opportunities facing the trust land portfolio, and then making initial recommendations on addressing these challenges and opportunities in our legislative report. So I just wanted to pause here for a moment and just ask the board if there are any questions or comments that the board would like to make related to the proviso or the derivation of this trust land performance assessment.
Hi, this is Bill Peach.
Hi, Bill.
Hi. I am interested in the report's recommendations for the Board of Natural Resources. And actually, a lot of our board members have regular interface with our legislators. So I would appreciate a copy of the original report as soon as possible. Thank you.
So, absolutely, Commissioner. And we'll actually get to some of the recommendations a little later in this presentation. So we'll cover that in a little bit.
Okay.
Super. I look forward to listening to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Peach. Okay, so, oh, go ahead.
Ask a question of framing. And I think this goes to some of the discussion that we heard prior to the presentation. How are you in the original framing of the study, thinking about non-market values and ecosystem services vis-a-vis the undivided loyalty question, recognizing there are trade-offs, but as a matter of policy, how, as we measure these things, I'm not saying that it's not a good idea to measure things that might be useful to know, but as a matter of policy, how are we entering this conversation thinking about these non-market ecosystem service types of values? Is that it looks like a quizzical response.
So, Kristen, would you like to have a go, or shall I?
Go right ahead, Angus.
Okay, so in terms of the framing, Dr. Brown, of the study and the assessment work, we've done this under, and actually the first line on the bullet on this slide gives you an indication of our framing and the framing that we gave to Deloitte. It's very much looking at these lands are state trust lands, and we're not questioning that trust status, and we're not, and the fiduciary purpose of these lands. And so when Deloitte actually came and was doing their work, they framed and have framed their report very much as their audience being the beneficiaries, and asking the question really, how well is DNR as trust manager doing? So how then do we connect the piece around the non-market values? This is obviously of interest, I think, to the agency, including, to the department, including the board. If you look at the policies for sustainable forests, as an example, it not only covers, obviously, the main focus about our revenue generating activities, but also looks at looking after ecosystem values, protecting and conserving those, as well as some social values. They're mixed in as much as our policies. So from one side of it, we want to know, I think, as an agency, the decisions that we make in the revenue generating side of our activities, what their impacts are going to be across the broader societal values. So a little bit, I think, what one of the commenters made about that license to operate, I think, is where the connection is. The other, I think, is also maybe from a purely, and can be looked at from a purely business sense. What opportunities might there be in the future to actually capture some of these non-market values that we have currently at the moment, and how might there be a mechanism to benefit the beneficiaries? And another commenter, I think, had mentioned carbon. Carbon may be one of those ways to capture that value in a way, that's not a traditional form of a market value. So those are the sort of couple of examples, Dr. Brown, that we're kind of looking at the non-market value side of it.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so getting into the Deloitte report, as Angus mentioned, beneficiaries have been identified by Deloitte as the audience, and the valuation that they provide is based on 2018 data. Before we jump into the results of their evaluation, I want to touch on two key concepts that they brought to us in response to the legislative proviso. So the first is a concept that Deloitte utilized in their analysis, which is called trust value. So trust value is a metric that Deloitte created and which they determined to be the most appropriate for assessing the value of trust lands and the best available surrogate for fair market value, which was requested in the proviso. It reflects the unique nature of these assets, the unique nature being that these assets are managed on trust lands that carry constraints that are unlike those on private lands. Examples include the management of the assets for beneficiaries, the constitutional and statutory restrictions on the management of these assets. So due to these characteristics, Deloitte developed an appraisal metric to focus almost entirely on the income generating capability of these lands. The second concept that was introduced to us in the Deloitte report is in response to the emphasis in the proviso on rates of return. So Deloitte holds that the proviso implies that a rate of return is an appropriate metric for performance. Rates of return are typically calculated by dividing the revenue an asset produces by its overall fair market value. Since the calculation relies on fair market value or the surrogate trust value in Deloitte's report, that asset value is also limited by the restrictions on state trust lands I referred to earlier. So instead, Deloitte recommends that the beneficiaries, the legislature as trustee, and the department as trust manager should focus on cash flow to the beneficiaries as the preferred metric of both performance and management competence. Their analysis provides both, but focuses on cash flow or revenue. Okay, so this slide provides a snapshot of Deloitte's appraisal of the state trust assets. Was there a question? Okay, I'm just going to keep going. So, so looking at the table, it includes gross income, net operating income. So the net operating income is calculated by taking the gross revenue and subtracting the management expenses that DNR retains for the management of the lands. And then the third column is trust value, which is the surrogate for fair market value, the metric I just explained. And the final column, which divides net operating income by trust value. This is the surrogate for rate of return. So, and the table is summarized in the pie chart, which shows the percentage that each asset's revenue contributes to the entire portfolio, where timber is by far the largest revenue generating asset in the portfolio, followed by agriculture and commercial real estate. So the way we think about these results is we think of them as a baseline or a benchmark against which to compare ourselves moving forward. And this was asked for in the proviso. To provide just a little bit of detail to Commissioner Peach's question he asked earlier related to appraisals and whether future income to beneficiaries is included in the calculation of, in this case, in the trust value, the land valuation portion of this. Deloitte predominantly, their appraisal approach slightly varies by asset class, but the main approach they took was the income-based approach, which I think was mentioned earlier. And it's a direct capitalization method that is based on 1 year's income expectancy at a market-derived capitalization rate to determine the combined value of, well, all of the values related to that asset. So in this case, for each asset, they determined the direct capitalization rate using various resources. NCREIF is one of them. They're investor indices. And then they divided the capitalization rate, or they divided the revenue by the capitalization rate to derive the value. But I would say their method does not include future income to beneficiaries as part of their appraisal. Although I think that's an interesting question.
Can I make a little?
Yes.
Kristen, can I just make a little addition to that? Actually, they looked at two approaches, one that you just described, and the other was the discounted cash flow approach, which does address Commissioner Peach's questions. Sorry about that. I apologize for making sort of a correction, but there were two approaches that were used in the income approach. So I think that addresses your question around that. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments about the Deloitte appraisal results?
So what was the overall decision as compared to other states that manage an asset like ours?
So Deloitte, and actually we've also looked at other states and their processes for evaluations. What we found was very different approaches in essentially accounting and in doing and conducting these valuations. The most similar approach and the state that does more regular valuations is Idaho, and their approach by They're, I guess I'll probably use the wrong term here, but investment managers is a very similar approach using income. If I'm correct, Kristen, is that right? From Callum?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, so a very similar approach to what Deloitte adopted here in terms of defining a trust value. The Idaho approach is very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, Deloitte looked at the Callum report in order to develop their approach to our evaluation, the evaluation of our trust lands.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Peach?
Yeah, just a black and white question. Are we above or below the other people we compare ourselves to?
So, this is a little bit of a difficult question. It's not actually a black and white one, because the rate, if you look at that sort of rate of return or the net income, or net operating income divided by the trust value, they actually represent the cap rates, or very close to the cap rates. So in Idaho, they have, if you look, compare timber as the asset class, they have a lower level of return on theirs, but that's largely because of the forest base they have and the selection of the cap rates. So it's not a straightforward comparison, and that's why actually you'll see in the details of some of the report from Deloitte that they attempted to do these comparisons but actually rejected doing them because of accounting differences as well as because of appraisal differences.
I would very much appreciate accessing the report directly from Deloitte. It's interesting. They're very pragmatic in their approach. Thank you. And also, Angus, may I receive a copy of the algorithm used to do the calculation of the land value?
I missed the last part of that question.
I'm sorry for occupying the board's time. Can you give me a call later, Angus?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. So we'll move to looking at the Earth Economics work. Their job was to estimate the value of ecosystem services and recreational benefits for the asset classes, and then Earth Economics also added carbon storage. So to help understand ecosystem services, they describe ecosystem services in the following way. On state trust lands, there are forests, watersheds, mountains, and shorelines, which represent natural capital assets. These assets contain multiple ecosystems that perform a variety of ecosystem functions, and these functions provide beneficial services to society. So Earth Economics' job was to identify the ecosystems that occur in the asset classes within the trust lands portfolio, list the functions that they provide, and then research the economic value of the benefits provided by those ecosystem functions. So examples of ecosystem benefits provided by ecosystem service functions include providing disaster risk reduction, water quality and supply, mitigating fires, floods, pollination, wildlife habitat. There's quite a list enumerated in the report. And these are the results that Earth Economics found. They found that state trust lands provide over $1.4 billion per year in non-market ecosystem benefits. The table also summarizes something called the social cost of carbon. This is a term of art that's used in carbon analysis. The EPA defines it as meaning to be a comprehensive estimate of climate change damages and includes, among other things, changes in net agricultural productivity, human health, property damages from increased flood risk, and changes in energy system costs, such as reduced costs for heating and increased costs for air conditioning. This is a one-time, it's not an annual cost, it's a one-time cost to society if that asset were taken away. So for example, removing all of the trees from state trust lands would incur a social cost of over $16 billion. Recreation at the bottom there provides an additional almost $1 billion worth of benefits per year. So clearly the ecosystem services, the carbon, the recreation that's provided by these state lands are huge benefits. In addition to their ability to provide revenue, they also have significant public value for their natural capital. These findings demonstrate the enormous contribution that working lands make to society. These working farms, forests, grazing lands in their current state under their current management are providing these contributions for their environmental and recreational value. But as it's been pointed out in the comments and is important to consider, while these are in dollars, these benefits cannot be bought and sold in markets, so they often don't have market prices, which means that the estimates do not represent revenue available to beneficiaries. But they do represent areas that need to be explored because at some point, as we've talked about earlier, there might be opportunities to monetize these as markets emerge for selling these benefits. So now I'm going to hand the presentation over to Angus.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kristen. So I'm going to do a few slides before we get into the initial recommendations. And board members, please just, if you have questions along the way, just please ask them. So Kristen has described the two pieces of work by Deloitte and then Earth Economics. And then there's the third piece of work, which is what we're doing as staff work, in part just to bring the two reports together, but it also to respond to the budget proviso. And the third is then obviously to look at the steps going forward. And so as part of our analysis, we are trying to look at, okay, what are the ways that we can improve rates of return, increase reliability, and possibly enhance revenues, and then focus in on what are the factors that are constricting us, constraining our management, and to achieve those objectives of increasing both reliability and total revenue. And the factors that we're kind of considering there, you can see in a little box, they can range from those that are statutory, constitutional, they're operational, and also maybe some social factors. And we've looked fairly wide, and I think that some of the comments that you heard this morning, some of the areas that we're going to go and probe into are going to make some folks quite nervous. And that's, I think, okay at this point, so that we can have that deliberate conversation about and reflect about whether it's a good idea to change or propose changes to some of those areas or not. But at this time, we don't have any proposals. We just have some initial ideas and recommendations, which we're going to cover. So one of our first steps, if you can go to the next slide, Kristen, was to go back and look at that previous study that you heard about that Miguel mentioned. So back in 1995, the department contracted with Deloitte and Touche to do a study very similar to the current study that we did today. In fact, their scope was a little wider and looked both at the land assets or hard assets and also at the liquid assets, which are managed by the State Investment Board. This time round, we did not include in the scope any look at the liquid assets that the State Investment Board is managing. We just looked at the hard assets, the land assets that DNR manages. However, as you can see from this table, as I've been talking probably, we looked at the differences, and we looked particularly at the differences in revenue. We also looked at values, so what was the valuation then and now. And the reason that we didn't go any further with the valuation comparison is because there were some significant differences in the approach. The 1995 approach took very much a sales comparison approach of the assets, and also the lumping and grouping of the assets was different. While this time round, it was very much more approach of the income evaluation approach. However, what we did look at was revenue. And what we did in addition to that was bring the 1995 values up to 2018 so we could do a direct comparison. And as you can see, some areas saw a significant decline in revenues, overall around 35%. And there were, and there have been, some success areas, such as in agriculture or commercial real estate. But the main driver, as you've seen previously from the revenues that we generate for the beneficiaries, is from our timber asset. And in this period of time, over this between 1995 and 2018, we've seen a 45% decline in real revenues that are being earned from the timber asset. So with that, I'm going to ask Kristen to go to the next slide. We started to dig in a little bit about why.
Angus, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yep.
So sorry, just real quick on the last slide, you might have said it. What inflation indicator, what did you use to bring $95 into 2018?
You mean what CPI were we using?
Yeah.
Ooh, not off the top of my head whether we were using a general one or whether we were using distinct ones from each of the asset classes. Do you know? I can't remember. Can you, Kristen?
We used a general one. It wasn't. Well, I can confirm that. I'll confirm it.
Thank you.
Good question.
Sorry, there's a box here.
Yeah, it's good question. Yeah, we'll get back to you on that. I'm sorry you can't answer that, Superintendent. You can flick to the next slide.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
So digging in a little bit on timber revenue and why timber revenue declined, there are a number of factors behind why timber revenues could have declined over time. And we're still continuing to sort of probe and look at this, and I'm sure as we get into more discussions with beneficiaries and stakeholders, there'll be new questions to raise and to search. But the two main factors that we believe that are influencing that decline in revenue are, one, stumpage prices, which is the chart on the left-hand side. Again, these are all in real prices. And the second one is the decline in operating land base, which I'm going to talk a little bit about as being reflected on the right-hand side, that chart there, which shows sold and removed timber volume. So in terms of stumpage prices over time, and it's about a 35% decline in revenues over this time period. Again, depending on what your points, but I'm just using that trend line there in red. There are various factors behind that. Obviously, 1995 was a peak period of timber prices. That was related to the spotted owl. It was also related to the export market at the time, which took up also internal prices, even though DNR is excluded from exporting timber. So there was a high around 1995, so we acknowledge that. But there have also been some structural changes since then in the market. So differences in milling infrastructure, for example, have changed. And also, we looked at actual log prices. So these are stumpage prices on this chart. So we looked at log prices. There's a similar trend, not quite as dramatic, but it's similar in terms of that decline. There's also, over this period of time, been a steady increase in costs. So inflation has caused costs to rise. So harvesting costs, fuel, labor, equipment, etc. So that will also eat away at the inflation prices. I guess the essential message is here that the price that we're seeing for timber is not keeping up with inflation. We need to probably dig in a little bit further with this and find different ways, mechanisms that we might be able to add value back into the program. The other factor, of course, is the amount of land that you've got to be able to operate on. And during, again, same period, 1995, using that as the base, to 2018, we've seen about a 17% decline in timber revenues over time. And so that being a reduction caused by a reduction in the land base. And that reduction in the land base has been caused largely by increasing environmental regulations, some also related to our social license. And, you know, a recent decision that we've made, the Marble Mulet decision on the long-term conservation strategy, just being an example of one of those. So let's move on to the next slide. So decrease in revenue is one of our challenges. The other challenge that we see is around revenue reliability, and we've heard this consistently from beneficiaries about the reliability of the revenue that we're generating. So this chart here is just total net revenue generated from state trust lands over that same time period, both in real and nominal prices and values. As you can see, it is fairly variable. And this is at the gross level. So you can imagine that when we take it down to an individual trust level, that variability is only going to increase. And there are some trusts that have multiple sets of beneficiaries that we distribute, or that the revenues get distributed through. So that primarily being an example of the state forest lands, where revenues are distributed to the counties, and then the counties distribute to the junior taxing districts. So that variability will increase even further. And that, as you've heard today in comments, and we heard during the Marble Mulet and Sustainable Harvest conversations, is exasperating problems of providing local services, of which these funds go to support. So how do we address this issue around revenue reliability is kind of the other focus of the opportunities that we have in front of us. Next slide, please. So how to address those opportunities? Well, we group those into four in our preliminary analysis, and this is just the work we've been doing to date, and this is how we're organizing some of the work on the legislative report. We see sort of four areas where there are opportunities. And we're going to step through some of the ideas and recommendations behind these. But these four general areas are, first, updating the business model. And by the business model, we mean, can be fairly wide-ranging, but we definitely mean the way that we internally operate within DNR. So improving some of our business practices, accounting practices, the way that we report our financial performance, etc. So that's a very sort of basic level of updating our business model. But there are also suggestions, and you will see initial recommendations that look at far-ranging, much broader. So governance of the trust assets, and also alternative financial models. Increasing access to the capital. DNR is a business generating revenue, but has actually very little access to capital. Its only access is the state treasurer, and it's through the capital funds. The other access to what we have is the management funds. In the past, those management funds have provided adequate reserves to do investments, and I think as I've talked to you in the past, those reserves don't exist any longer. So not having access to capital doesn't allow us to take on new opportunities when they arise to invest in to generate future revenues. We talked a little bit about generating. Commissioner.
Sorry, is there another organization in Washington State that accesses capital? You know, a state or county run organization?
You know, that's a really good question. I don't think we have an answer at this point, and that's one of the things that we're going to start to ask and probe. I believe, and I may be absolutely incorrect here, so I'm going to step out on a little bit of a limb here, but I think that maybe some of the port authorities may have access to capital that's outside the state system. But I don't know if Mr. Cahill can provide us any examples outside of state government. No. So that's something Commissioner Peach that definitely will start to look at and see what other organizations, either state, local, or as I say, port authorities have in terms of that authority for access to capital.
Thank you, Angus.
Yeah.
I mean, just a comment, our school districts are accessing debt markets all the time. So we've got, you know, our largest network of local governments are school boards, and they access capital all the time through debt instruments for capital facilities and some limited operating stuff. My question on the business model, the typical fee is 25% of gross revenue, at least on the timber side. Is that kind of been the average the last several years?
Yeah, so the current business model for funding DNR is through the retainment of some of the gross revenues. And it depends upon the trust that we're managing. So the federally granted trusts is generally 31% of revenues. And for the state forest lands, it can vary. So state forest transfer is 25%, and for state forest purchase is 50% of the revenues. So it varies. And you will see, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to one of the recommendations from Deloitte is their suggestion that they make a recommendation that we should look at the way that we're funded, because the rate should be really probably relate to either direct costs or by asset class. So I'll leave it at that. There's going to be a lot more detail on this as you see when you see the reports, and then we'll come back and discuss this in a lot more detail. I'm just sort of conscious of time, so I want to step through a couple of the next slides, and we'll get back to some of the recommendations that we look under each of these categories. And so we'll move on, Kristen, to the next slide, and I'll cover the other two aspects here. So to help us sort of frame the work that we're doing, to look at and organize the work that we're doing going forward, we've organized this into a sort of project structure, something similar to the way that we organized the Sustainable Harvest or the Marble Murelet work. And this is sort of to describe what our need is and what our purpose is. And these are initial and draft. These are developed by the team, the staff to the board here. And so we've described these to provide us direction moving forward. As you can see here, the first is, again, we're focusing in on what we believe are the two problems that have been identified, which are to increase the amount of revenue and increase its reliability. And the purpose behind this, right, describes really the process by which we think we'll be able to achieve that need. And that will be through this modernization process of state trust lands. There will be legislative proposals, which we have yet to develop in their full amount or their full extent. There will be changes to board policies. I'll give you an example of the asset management plan or the asset stewardship plan. The last time that was developed by the board was in 1998. Again, in response to the previous report in 1995, we imagine that we will take on an initial effort with you as a board in updating that stewardship plan. There will obviously be, as I've mentioned before, updates to our operational and business practices. So, Kristen, next slide. Are you able to go to the next slide, Kristen?
Can I just ask one more question on that? Sorry, I'm just a little late here.
I've also...
Angus, your voice and volume are dragging a lot, so it's causing us a bit of a challenge. I wanted to jump in here. But as part of that previous slide, as you reconsider a little bit of the business model and maximizing revenue yield, I have to ask the question of representation. One of the great strategies going forward is to capitalize better on recreational purposes. And you know, we've had tough moments where some of the adjacencies next to state parks and other things. And so my governance question is, remind us again who makes up the board and whether there's ever conversation about adding board members that represent recreation or conservation or other viewpoints that might be overall creating net benefit, even though they're not direct beneficiaries. They're not trustees per se, but they have a perspective that would bring a balance to this larger question of revenue and kind of rethinking it all. How does that come into the consideration? And I think you're muted again.
So it sounds like I'll just sort of jump in there while Angus is trying to reconnect. I mean, I think all of these ideas, I don't think we've actually considered that idea, but I think that's one idea among the ones that we would be considering. I mean, that's just an interesting thought to actually bring in, you know, recreational interests or conservation interests. Clearly, the board composition is comprised of beneficiaries, and so so we'd have to sort of think through that possibility. But Angus, did you want to add to that?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. It's a problem I've been having all morning. But I think you answered the question to Superintendent. I think those are going to be discussions around the business model, around the governance sort of structure. The board at the moment is is in statute and represents the beneficiaries. Again, this being the purpose of these lands, is their primary purpose is a fiduciary one to the trusts.
Although there is the governor's representative who represents the general public. So there's that piece too.
Correct. So
okay.
I was saying that to evaluate proposals, we've listed a set of objectives to help us frame them. Again, these are initial and draft in form. We will, continue the sort of discussion along with beneficiaries and stakeholders around these objectives, but fairly straightforward in their framing. So I think we're going to be looking at proposals that will give us an increase in the amount of revenue and reliability to revenue, sustaining the natural resource lands. While we'll be seeking opportunities to diversify, the working forests and agricultural lands will continue to be a major or the majority of the trust lands in our portfolio. And we see that. So how do we maintain them and how do we increase the revenue that we earn from them is the challenge. And the third one there we've just been touching on, how do we maintain the social and economic values of these lands to the broader and wider community, as well as look at, obviously, feasible solutions. Let's move on to the next slide. So these next few slides, Kristen and I will go back and forward on a little bit. They cover some of the initial recommendations. So some of these recommendations come from Deloitte. Some of them come from actually past studies that we've done to look at trust land performance. Some of them come from thinking, some initial thinking of DNR staff. Obviously, there can be many more, and what is up here on the slide is just a taste of them. And we'll cover a little bit of this as we go through each of these slides. But and there was obviously a lot more detail of this in the reports. But this first one around updating the business model covers a really wide range, along with all the others, of the recommendations. As I say, they range from very much the operational nature of increasing, improving our accounting systems, for example, or computer systems and databases, right through to questioning and looking at the governance models that we have. One of the main thrusts that Deloitte had around as recommendations for us is to really incorporate many for-profit enterprise business practices within the agency. That goes from, as I've already mentioned, accounting to reporting, as being some of those practices that we should incorporate. We've already touched on sort of new operational funding models. Deloitte made some recommendations about whether to do this as direct costs, or, as I mentioned earlier, whether to actually do a different rate per asset class. This next one around single investment manager is probably better described as really having better coordination and integration between the DNR as the manager of the fixed assets, the land assets, and the State Investment Board. At the moment, the two in Washington State don't really converse about the collective assets, for example, of the common school. Each has their own policies, each has their own objectives, etc., in carrying out those fiduciary responsibilities. We found in other states that's not different approaches are taken, where there's a more integrated look at the portfolio of fixed and liquid assets. So that's a possibility of an area that we could look at. And there's, in other states, there's been some innovative ideas about creating funds that provide more reliability of distributions to beneficiaries. This particularly in the case of the state of Idaho, which provide interesting models that we might want to look at for tackling the question around reliability of distributions to beneficiaries. Next slide. Kristen.
Okay, so initial recommendations for ways to increase access to capital include borrowing authority. DNR's current ability to borrow money or issue bonds is very limited, as we mentioned before. We're basically asked to run a $200 million business without a credit card. This idea would grant DNR with authority to borrow money or issue bonds to allow more investment in opportunities with high initial costs but high potential for increased revenue. Smoothing revenue through loans. Deloitte recommends a program in which the state of Washington borrows money as needed to smooth the flow of revenue to trust beneficiaries. It could be a program that would be particularly useful during economic downturns. It might give DNR more flexibility to sell when prices are good, and not have to sell when the markets aren't so good, and still be able to provide a reliable flow of revenue to our beneficiaries. Monetizing ecosystem services, we talked about that, but that would be another potential source of increased capital by participating in carbon markets. And then retaining earnings for capital investments. This was just Deloitte's observation that DNR is unable to accumulate the capital base to make significant investments, and that retaining capital from earnings to continue to reinvest in the asset class is really crucial to ensuring cash returns are maximized. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. So there's a set of recommendations around the greater ability to transact lands. And we've talked about a couple of these already. So Deloitte has made some recommendations about assessing and looking at our statutes, particularly around public auction requirements. As one of the commenters has made, many of these requirements were put into the Constitution or were placed in statutes many years ago. So are they still relevant today? They may well be, but that's part of the process that we wanted to go through and question. We've touched on the parcel size limitation of federally granted lands and the plat requirements for those sales. One of the mechanisms that we use a lot for land transactions, particularly of federally granted lands, is the use of the land bank. And there are some limitations around the acreage and the use of that mechanism for transacting of land. So that might be another area of where we start to go in and look at recommendations for change there. Currently, under statute, state forest lands cannot be sold. They can be exchanged, but they cannot be sold. So what would be the proposition of changing that? What would be the advantages and disadvantages potentially of changing such a statute? And then lastly there, I've already mentioned is sort of updating our asset management policies, specifically those ones around transition lands. And I'm sure that's one of the aspects that we will be discussing with the board as we go through updating our policies around that. Thank you, Kristen.
Okay. Expanded initial recommendations for expanding responses to societal expectations related to funding sources for recreation. So DNR provides recreation on state lands when the use is in the best interest of the state and the general welfare of the citizens and is consistent with the obligations of trust management. That's a statute. Recreational trails, trailhead parking, campgrounds, other features of recreational facilities on state trust lands are accessed by forest roads that are financed with trust revenue. Trust revenue is also used for some ongoing costs to manage dispersed recreation and repair damaged facilities. So while recreation is a benefit enjoyed by all Washington residents, it does not specifically benefit the trust beneficiaries. So this recommendation would be to identify a consistent and adequate funding source to support the public access projects. The final three programs here, the Community Forest Trust, Trust Land Transfer, and Trust Land Replacement Program, we've heard from commenters concerns about these programs. They're really designed to identify places where there are lands that are managed for, that are trust lands, where there are either community pressures or ecological opportunities to manage those lands for other objectives as deemed by society. So each of these programs provides essentially an off-ramp to take those trust lands out of trust status and put them in a different status so they can be managed by those objectives, but still compensate the beneficiaries. So the idea would be to either revitalize these programs or maybe adapt them to address many of the concerns that we heard from commenters. But these were examples that we could think of programs that give DNR the ability to address the increasing societal demands on the lands that we're trying to also manage for revenue, or primarily manage for revenue. Okay.
So thank you, Kristen. So this is the last slide. So just to give you a sort of kind of summary about where we're going. So, you know, we are excited in the department to sort of embark on this journey of trying to modernize DNR and bring it into the 21st century. I want to mention that many of the statutes and guidance that we have currently was developed either on the formation of the department or prior, so 1957, although yes, there have been statute changes since then, but there hasn't really been a major overhaul or look at the business model and practices of the department in a long time. So we're excited to be able to sort of launch that with this work. And to modernize, we're going to need to pursue a change agenda at three levels. There's going to be a need to do it at the legislature with legislative proposals. There's going to be a need to make board policy changes, and as we've mentioned before, the operational updates and changes. And we in the department, we're committed to making all three of those. The question I think will be that you've been raised today is how will we make those? And how will we go about doing them? And I think the legislative and board policy processes are going to be the two that are going to really interest beneficiaries and stakeholders. So we are starting to formulate and devise our outreach strategy and how to be inclusive of all the beneficiaries and the stakeholders who want to be included within this process. So the first step to this was obviously the publication of this report and the accompanying reports and analysis by Deloitte and Earth Economics. The second is we do have a set of very small initial proposals around our timber sales process and some to our land transactions program in our 2021 legislative proposals, which we came and talked to you about back, I believe, in September of this year or or October at one of those board meetings. The third sort of process is between now and really April of next year, we're going to be developing and meeting with various beneficiaries and stakeholders, running through this presentation and then following it up with more detailed presentations and more detailed requests to get as folks are able to dig into the reports. You know, over the longer term, our idea is to develop a set of proposals that we can hope to bring to the 22 legislative session that will look at modernizing trust land management. So with that, we've concluded this presentation. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Board members, first of all, I want to say thank you, Kristen and Angus, for a very robust presentation, and we're still just at the 50,000 foot level. As you can see, a lot of work has gone into this. A Deloitte report, I think, I have a lot of feedback. Deloitte's report, I think, provides really an enormous amount of body of information that enables us as we go forward to set our agency up for success, as well, and most significantly our beneficiaries and the larger responsibilities we have to the public and the state. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Are there any comments, questions following that presentation?
This is Bill Peake. My question is, thank you very much. I asked this of a lot of organizations that request funding from the county. My question is, how do you measure performance? Is that identified in the report? Thank you.
So the major metric that Deloitte suggests around measuring performance is revenue. So cash flow to the beneficiaries. Mm-hmm. That's the major thrust of the performance measure for that Deloitte measures. But I think as the board considers how does the board want to measure performance, that will be part of the policy changes and could be reflected into the asset management discussions that we have going forward.
Commissioner, just state, I mean, so obviously I put forward performance measure, metric. We have our own that is at the suite, everything from operations and efficiencies to performance on the land to multiple other values. And so I think part of the conversation I'll bring to the board in 2021 is mentioning about what you all believe should be some of those performance measures. One thing I just want to also add is as you know, we've created a Sustainable Harvest Calculation Advisory Council that is helping inform work in the sustainable harvest calculation, not only for Eastern Washington, but also West. In addition, we are going to be developing and bringing forward, and we've had this conversation, other advisory councils that will help take the information from this report, take the conversation, the board and the legislature and other beneficiaries and stakeholders, and be able to sort of dive in a richer level and bring recommendations back to the board.
An outstanding response, and I thank you very much.
So you asked the question, kind of, just response. Hey, this is really good. I appreciate the very high level, and I know there's going to be more coming from the full report. But I just think it's a really, really high quality way to present the challenge. I guess my mind goes to a part B, and I've kind of talked about this a little bit. Part A is really evaluating the value of the asset, and you define the ultimate goal is sort of what is the revenue yield to the beneficiaries, and that makes total sense given the construct that we've historically operated in. There's a throughput though on those further investments, so when a beneficiary gets those, then what happens to that money that creates a benefit of various degrees? And when the legislature scoops $200 million a biennium and then builds schools, it's got some value to it, but it's got value different than the geography in which the trees are often harvested, and as well as other lands. When those go to some other trust beneficiary, you get a different yield, and I'm not suggesting the analysis should go there yet, but my question on sort of the representation and governance question is, are there voices we miss in thinking about that part as well as this, where those investments go? And then I'm definitely thinking about trade-offs, just longer term. You've got an engagement here in this slide about a legislative kind of initial thing this year and then something bigger next year. I've not been shy to tell you that I'm willing to take a lot of risk as long as we protect the value of what I think is the contribution to education, but that can be a replacement value some other way. I think of, 6% of our capital budget between state and local sources is now coming from timber sales in this state. But that same $100 million a year for cities and counties and the timber industry and what is at risk in rural Washington, if they don't get shored up, is a significantly bigger downside risk than the benefit of me having 5.5% or 6% more money to build schools. Our counties are hurting desperately in this state. We have failed to build revenue models that are sustainable. Everything is a presumption of growth. If you're not growing, you're dying in public sector. And those are places where there isn't a ton of population growth and sometimes declines, but they've got a real need to be viable. So I really like what's been done here. I'm going to keep pushing this question of, okay, but part B of the analysis is where do those investments end up and is there a higher, better use? I don't want schools harmed in any way, shape, or form, but I believe the legislature will consider revenue sources that are more progressive, more sustainable, more aligned to the way we generate revenue associated with education. In other words, education builds critical thinkers in the labor market, and so maybe the labor market needs a bigger hit in terms of the tax burden, where these dollars are far more focused in rural communities and they are not getting the benefit of them, in my opinion. And so I'm just going to keep asking that throughput question of where's the best place for these investments to ultimately land. And I don't mean that in terms of traditional investments, but in terms of who benefits with it. So.
Superintendent, I first thank you. I've always appreciated your willingness and desire to sort of partner with our agency and help go to the legislature to sort of unlock, or I would say untie our hands in a number of ways, right, to get the better, greater benefit for our schools, our counties, and I think ideally this report was supposed to have been sort of done, finished earlier. Deloitte ran into some challenges. COVID has created an enormous amount of sort of disruption in everybody's work plan and schedule. As a result, we didn't have the ability to have a fully robust, one completed report by Deloitte, then a robust sort of outreach and development of our report, that it would enable us to come this coming session to the legislature with some solutions, right, or strategies. As well as the fact that, our legislators right now are just trying to figure out how to do Zoom, their appetite, is a little bit limited by the realities of COVID overhauling how they've operated for 100+ years, So I would say to us, what we're trying to do is come forward with a couple of key potential simple sort of fixes or solutions legislatively, while we then spend the bulk of next year not only diving into the report, getting the board up to speed on it, and also focusing on what some small, medium, and big legislative solution strategy proposal will be for the 2022 legislative session. And you're going to be key, your agency is going to be key to that. So I appreciate anything else? Jim, I can tell you want to speak.
Thank you. I just
wanted to say thanks for the presentation. There's a lot in there. I really look forward to diving into the details of the report and working with the board and beneficiaries to try to figure out improvements that we can make. Some of those proposals are going to be big uphill challenges. Others will be a little easier to move, but happy to continue to work on that once we get a report.
I can tell you're excited for some constitutional amendments. That's always something I wanted to do. Just kidding.
Go big or go home.
Yeah, I am all in. Anything else?
This is Phil Pete.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. So the interesting issue about the rate of return on each fund for the specific junior testing district intrigues me. Whether that entity would decide to change management of the property or monetize it. But the idea of really studying the value all the way through the value chain to the junior taxing district, I'm very interested in the next steps that we'll take in response to this report. That's it. Thank you.
Board members, anything else? I know we're getting close to the witching hour of noon. All right. Angus, do you have anything for closing? Are you good? Okay. My only disappointment is we did not get to see Dr. Brown's infamous cat visit during the board meeting. I hope we will definitely continue to see that during 2021. Let's see. I want to thank board members. Wow, we have just finished out a monumental year. Enormous amount of things accomplished, even amongst some very challenging environment. I appreciate everything you are all doing. Each one of you within your own role has significant challenges as a result of COVID, coupled with the economic impact. So I want to thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your commitment to the people and students of Washington State. And I want to also thank the DNR team. Enormous amount of work has gone into not only the work that was just presented, but in addition to that, helping make sure this agency could continue to deliver on our fiduciary responsibilities as well as our public safety responsibilities and just general health, economically and environmentally for the state of Washington. And I couldn't imagine working for a greater group of people, and I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you and to all the people standing behind you that helped make this year successful, even amongst the enormous amount of challenges. So I am looking forward to 2020. Please make it a better one, but thank you. All right, that concludes our board meeting. Thank you all. And Ralph, thanks for keeping us on task and keeping us alive and going.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Be safe. Have a great end of year. Bye-bye.
Bye.